I've always had an interest in children and their rights to be safe and cared for, and many years ago I had an incident when I was volunteering at the University of Washington Hospital and I was nothing more than a kid, and it ingrained upon me that someone needed to speak up for the children. And so that kind of sparked my interest, and as I grew and became involved, I would often become involved in programs that helped kids. Child abuse and neglect doesn't just occur over in, the large cities or on the other side of the tracks, that it's in every community, and it brings light to the needs of our families. Not just the needs of our kids, but also the families in our community. The big issues in neglect cases often is drugs. It was the issue clear back when we began the program, and it's definitely still an issue. Drugs interfere with not only the health and of the parent and the stability of the parent, but in the ability to care and protect their children. At the time, I did say I would be happy to help start it, and that was 25 years ago. So the CASA program is coming up on its 25th anniversary this next October. The foster parents that came really felt the children that were in their care, their needs weren't being met, that they were slipping through the cracks. And due to caseloads and other issues within the community, they really wanted to have an advocate, a voice for that particular child, making sure that the courts and agencies knew what was important for that child and keep their voice powerful. It was not something I had done before, but my suggestion was that we approach the bench and see whether or not it was a program that they would like to see established here in our community. And at the time, the court was a combined judicial court, so it was for both Chelan and Douglas counties. And Judge Carol Wardell, now retired, was on the bench at the time. And so she's who we approached, and she was in favor of it and started, and actually, in my opinion, co-founded the program, because she started doing the research that was necessary, making the contacts that was necessary, and we started it. One of the first things we did was to decide whether or not it was going to be a nonprofit or whether it was going to be a court-based program, because in the state of Washington, most of the programs are court-based, which would mean that I would have been a county employee. And so it was decided that we would do a nonprofit, which, by the way, means you have to go find your money, and that it would help us remain independent. And so we were independent of the state and of the courts, basically. So we contract with the courts. The volunteers, we have over 100 volunteers. That's huge for such a small community. And they're dedicated, and they have a passion for children's rights. And I really owe it to the community that have helped this program in so many ways. So by advocating for the children's best interest in the court system, but also being out there and being spokespersons for the program itself and helping to recruit, helping with funding issues, taking the step forward to making a difference in the legislature and making a difference here in our community, in letting people know what the needs are of our families and our community.
And I pretty much got my first case that day, which, you know, was kind of what they warned me about during the training. Could happen straight away, and it did. And so since then I've served, currently I'm serving 5 children, which of a caseload of 2. And during that time I worked full time, but I was part of a non-profit and worked a lot on early learning initiatives across 8 counties and then across the state. So that made me an even more passionate advocate to see that the good majority of our kids come into the system under 5. And of course, birth to 5 is such an important part of a child's development that I couldn't ignore what this situation, what kids would go through during this time and the trauma that they would incur during this time. And so it's, like I said, it's made me a much more passionate advocate. CASA was always something that I thought about, and Sue announced her retirement back in April, and that was very difficult for you know, obviously the staff here that have worked with her for so many years, and the community too. That was going to be a big adjustment. We've seen that across our community with just a lot of people retiring after many years of service. And so it was going to be a big, I mean, it was a big step for me to put myself out there and apply for the position. Some months later, you know, I happened to, you know, have that tremendous honor and privilege of being asked to step into that position. CASA's come from all walks of life, and that's what makes us so unique, but we really represent the community standard of what care should be, and, you know, with kids. And so they facilitate, they investigate, they advocate, and they monitor. But I always say, ultimately, I'm CASA Lisa. You know, when I walk in the door with those kids, they know who I am, and that they know if they have any concerns at all, you know, that they can talk to me about those and the situations. And as I said, as Sue mentioned, the kids have been removed from their home more often than not, and that brings with it a whole bunch of trauma for the kids, whether they're placed in foster care or whether they're placed with a relative. And, you know, they're placed in a situation where they might have to move schools, or they have to have visits with their parents, perhaps supervised sometimes. So they're dealing with a lot of different changes, and yet the CASA is the one person that sticks with them all through that, and we, in a sense, build that relationship with the child.
And it's also important with our kids that are a little older is that we let the court know what the kids want. It's important for them to be able to have a voice and have a say. And so the volunteers make sure that they let the court know that Johnny wants to go home, or Johnny needs this, or wants more visits, and those kind of things, so that they can help make sure that they advocate for that. Always holding, though, that it is in the child's best interest that the voice of a volunteer brings to the court.
Mm-hmm.
Since the beginning of the program, we have served 1,458 children, and that's from right here in Chelan and Douglas County. We've also done some courtesy CASA work where children are placed within the community but out of a different court jurisdiction. So the numbers are even higher than that. Age-wise, it's of those 662 were under the age of 5. 425 are ages 6 to 11. So it does show it's the younger children, the most vulnerable, that are brought into the system. And so, as we've seen, we started off with I think 12 children in 1 year, and now we're serving 200 and I think it's 38 so far this year, or 258 children that we're serving. So you can see the growth. And again, the majority of the issues are the drugs and how that impacts our community as a whole. They want for their children the same thing you would want for your children, or I wanted for my children. But for one reason or another, they weren't able to provide that. And in hopes that, you know, as they became more involved in the system, that they would get their needs met, get the things that they needed to be successful. And along with that, I think, is a good working relationship with CASA volunteers, because after all, we all want the same thing. We want them to be successful. We know that these children want to be with their parents, that's their parent.
Every module of that new curriculum has cultural competence weaved in, because we recognize that sometimes our values are different to somebody else's values in the community, and we need to, you know, acknowledge that and really try our best to work with them and definitely respect their values.
As a system, there's lots of improvements we can do. You know, there's always issues, there's always poverty, there's always drugs, but if we can make a difference with one family and be able to support that parent also while remaining that powerful voice for the child, then ultimately that's the best outcome.
Yeah,
you know,
definitely.
that's success.
My name's Gretchen Milnes, and I am a CASA volunteer. So I've been with the CASA program, which stands for Court Appointed Special Advocate. I've been with this program for about 5 years, and we have 5 staff members. The rest of us are volunteers. So it is fitting that we're in the car because we rack up a lot of miles here. It's a privilege to be a CASA volunteer. So we are actually technically called a guardian ad litem. None of us have to take a case. We're given an option. Maybe they'll tell us a little bit about the case, and they try to find someone that is suited for that particular child. And as soon as we're assigned to the case, or we at least look at the case and maybe go meet the child or something, then we're actually appointed by the courts. I go to court quite often, actually, and it's either in Douglas County or Chelan County. That's where my cases are. The social workers are amazing, and they just do a fantastic job of trying to place the kids locally But there is a real shortage on foster parents, and also a lot of these children have seen such trauma or been exposed or experienced such trauma that a lot of their behaviors are necessitating therapeutic behavior homes, or even larger than the therapeutic behavior homes. And we don't have quite as many of those around here as is needed. So I drive a lot, and on one of my cases, round trip, I drive 400 miles to see my kids. And our CASA rules are that we're to see our children twice a month. And I have a fairly big caseload. We're there advocating for the best interest of these children. So anything that we feel is in the best interest of these children. So it's in regards to the actual legal case, but it's also in regards to, do we suspect that maybe this child has some learning disabilities? So we would advocate for, and we're very much usually in tandem with the department, with DCYF in our recommendations quite often. I mean, we're just recommending very much the same thing as they are. We suspect that these children need counseling, or they need maybe help with schooling in some way, like there's some specific thing that maybe would be in their best interest, but sometimes not. Sometimes we see some things maybe because, I don't know, we're in the home, or maybe, I don't know, but sometimes we might see something just a slight bit different than maybe the rest of the outer team, and so then we advocate on behalf of that child. Many, some people would say most, but many of our cases are secondary to substance abuse. So either drugs, alcohol, both, poly. We see a lot of neglect, abuse, but neglect secondary to substance abuse. We have babies that never leave the hospital, that go right from the hospital into foster care, and then right up until 18, 21. So 18 is usually where a child ages out, but if there are extenuating circumstances such as developmental disabilities or anything like that, the child can go to 21. Our only job in that courtroom is to represent the child. We're not paid. So this is passion. We're doing this because of passion and because we believe that they need a voice. So the Assistant Attorney General is the lawyer that is representing the state of Washington. So that person is representing the social worker, who is, if you look at the social worker, they are in the case the state of Washington. And so when the state of Washington comes in and feels that there's just cause to remove a child because they suspect that there's been abuse or neglect, then the child, for all intents and purposes, I guess you would say the child would be the ward of the state. And so that attorney represents the needs and the legal ramifications involving the state of Washington in this case. So far on this table, you've seen nobody that's in there for the child. And the child is probably, well, not probably, the child is the most vulnerable person in this whole equation. We are just there most of the time. And the child knows that. They know that we're just there. And some days that's really enough. You know, think about our own lives. I mean, our significant others or whatever, we just know that they're there. And some of these kids, some days they don't actually have that. So that's very significant to me, that no matter rain, we're kind of like the post office, rain, through sleet, through snow, through dark of night, we're there. And I go to the little graduations from kindergarten. I I go to a lot of events, and we're just there. Maybe don't say anything terribly significant or do all that much that's terribly significant, but we're there. Some of my cases I've had for 3+ years. So remember, I'm seeing these kids at least twice a month. So really getting to know these children, making sure they're getting great help in school, they're being seen in counseling, all of the different pieces of this pie. And then we actually see these children, perhaps maybe in a case, get adopted by the grandparents, or maybe move to another state with some relatives, or maybe get adopted by foster parents here around the area. I've seen all of these things, all of the scenarios that I just mentioned. I've seen them all, and those are very, very, very happy cases. I've also seen the other side of that coin, and no matter how hard it seems like we work, maybe it doesn't all work out beautifully, and those are bitter pills, but you know that you've done everything you can possibly humanly do to make it different. So both sides of the coin, but you work and you work and you work, no matter how it's going. A lot of times our kids blow out of placements. They'll have behaviors, but they've been through so much. And so anyway, one of his children had been blown out of a placement and was in a completely different place, and he had to drive and find this child. And the little person was sitting on the ground playing, and I don't remember exactly, but I think he said that the child hardly even looked up, but went back to playing and said, "I knew you'd find me." And that was it for me. When I heard that story, I knew that I could do this because I knew I could find these kids. If you saw their faces, you'd be in love. I mean, I'm Twitter-pated. I love these guys. They're fantastic. And boy, if I don't do it, who will? I mean, it's a privilege. I love these guys.